He was born in a one-room wooden cabin with a dirt floor. No wealth, no connections, no formal education. Just a thin, awkward boy who read by candlelight because candles themselves were a luxury. His clothes were often patched and torn. His shoes, if he had any, didn't fit. Yet one day, this boy would hold the highest office in the United States. He would lead a nation through its darkest hour. His name was Abraham Lincoln. But this isn't just a story about a president. It's the story of how pain, poverty, and persistence shaped one of the greatest minds in history. Abraham Lincoln came into the world on February 12, 1809, in a tiny log cabin in the backwoods of Kentucky. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a hard-working but poor farmer who struggled to keep food on the table. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was gentle and deeply kind. But life for the Lincolns was a daily fight against hunger, cold, and sickness. There was no luxury, no comfort, just survival. When Abe was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His mother fell ill after drinking contaminated milk and died painfully. Imagine being a child in the wilderness, burying your mother with your own hands. The loneliness of that loss carved something permanent into Lincoln's heart, an understanding of sorrow that would later make him one of the most empathetic leaders the world has ever known. Abe's father remarried a woman named Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow with children of her own. But she was kind and warm. She saw in Abe a spark. Unlike many stepmothers in stories, Sarah encouraged him to read, to dream, to learn. She used to say, "Abe was the best boy I ever saw." Her love changed the direction of his life. Education, however, was almost non-existent. In total, Lincoln had less than 1 year of formal schooling, but he became his own teacher. He borrowed books from neighbors, rare treasures in the frontier, and read them again and again until the words lived inside him. The Bible, Aesop's fables, Shakespeare, Blackstone's commentaries on the law. Each book opened a new world, and Abe devoured them as if he knew knowledge was his ticket out. He would walk miles, sometimes 20 at a stretch, just to borrow a single book. One story says he borrowed a biography of George Washington, accidentally damaged it in a rainstorm, and worked 3 full days in the farmer's field to repay him. That's who Lincoln was, a boy who paid for wisdom with sweat. As a young man, he worked whatever jobs he could find, splitting logs, ferrying passengers across rivers, clerking at a store. His hands were calloused, but his mind was sharp. In the evenings, while others played or rested, Abe would sit near the fireplace, scribbling math problems on wooden boards with pieces of charcoal. He was quiet but observant. People often underestimated him. Tall, thin, awkward, with a voice that cracked when he spoke. But beneath that humble appearance was a brain constantly in motion, analyzing, reasoning, questioning. When Lincoln was 21, his family moved to Illinois. It was there that his destiny began to take shape. He took on odd jobs, joined local debates, and gained a reputation for honesty and humor. People began calling him Honest Abe. That nickname wasn't a marketing trick. It was the truth. Once he walked several miles just to return a few pennies he had overcharged a customer. He also developed a talent that would become his superpower: storytelling. Lincoln could turn any moment, no matter how tense, into laughter or reflection with a story. He used it not just to entertain, but to teach. A man who could barely afford shoes became the best speaker in every room he entered. But Lincoln's life wasn't a straight climb upward. It was a staircase full of broken steps. He failed more than he succeeded. He lost business ventures, elections, even his first great love. In 1835, the woman he intended to marry, Anne Rutledge, died of illness. Lincoln fell into a deep depression, what he called the hypo, short for hypochondria, an old term for melancholy. For months he was inconsolable. Friends removed knives and razors from his reach, afraid he might harm himself. But somehow he rose again. He always did. He found purpose in politics, joining the Illinois state legislature. He believed in progress, roads, schools, industry, and fought for what he called a fair chance for every man. Yet even as his star began to rise, Lincoln's heart remained heavy. He married Mary Todd, a spirited woman from a wealthy Kentucky family, but their relationship was stormy. They lost 2 of their 4 children, and Mary's grief often drove her to outbursts that tested his patience. Then came the issue that would define his legacy: slavery. Lincoln hated slavery from the moment he first saw it. As a teenager, he traveled down the Mississippi River and witnessed slaves chained and whipped in New Orleans. The sight haunted him. He once said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." But he also knew the country was divided, North against South, freedom against oppression. One wrong move and the nation could tear itself apart. In 1858, Lincoln faced off against Stephen A. Douglas in a series of debates that electrified the nation. He lost the Senate race, but his words made him famous. When he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," America listened. 2 years later, in 1860, against all odds, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. The poor boy from the cabin was now the most powerful man in the country. But there was no time for celebration. The South seceded. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln entered the White House with no military experience, no allies in the South, and half the nation calling him an illegitimate president. Newspapers mocked him. Generals disobeyed him. Even members of his own cabinet doubted him. But Lincoln did what he always did. He learned, he listened, and he led. He spent sleepless nights in his office, reading reports by candlelight, worrying over soldiers, writing letters to grieving mothers. He visited battlefields, walked among the wounded, and never stopped questioning himself. His face aged years and months. The toll of the war etched deep lines around his eyes. But through all that chaos, he never lost his humanity. Once, when an officer was to be executed for desertion, Lincoln read the man's mother's letter begging for mercy. He pardoned the soldier, saying, "I think enough blood has been shed." To Lincoln, every life mattered. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the most powerful documents in history, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate states were free. It was a turning point not just in the war, but in human history. Yet it was also a risk that could have destroyed him politically. Lincoln didn't care. He said, "If my name ever goes down in history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." 2 years later, in 1865, as the war drew to a close, Lincoln stood on the steps of the Capitol and delivered his second inaugural address. His words were not filled with triumph but forgiveness, with malice toward none, with charity for all. He dreamed of healing the wounds of the nation, but fate had other plans. Just days after General Lee's surrender, on a quiet April evening, Lincoln went to Ford's Theater to watch a play. He was tired but happy. The war was over. Peace was near. During the performance, an actor named John Wilkes Booth slipped into the presidential box and fired a single bullet into the back of Lincoln's head. The president, who had carried a nation's pain, died the next morning. When the news spread, people wept openly in the streets. It was as if the soul of the nation itself had been struck down. Abraham Lincoln's body was carried by train through towns and cities, where thousands gathered to pay tribute. Some had once cursed his name, but now they cried for him. The poor boy from Kentucky, who had no money, no privilege, no chance, had changed the course of human history. Lincoln's life is a lesson written not in luxury but in struggle. He showed that greatness is not born. It is built, brick by brick, failure by failure, heartbreak by heartbreak. He taught the world that a man's beginnings do not define his end, that compassion is stronger than hatred, and that humility can coexist with power. And maybe that's why his story endures, because somewhere in every one of us there's a piece of that poor boy, dreaming by candlelight, believing that with enough courage, even the darkest cabin can give birth to light bright enough to guide a nation.